sit on foreign affairs. He's here today in Oman meeting with the government of Iran for indirect talks, which turned out to be briefly direct, where the two men, the Iranian foreign minister, met in the sidelines with Mr. Witkoff, all about stopping the nuclear program of enrichment of uranium of Tehran before it gets to the weapons grade stage or face grave consequences. Let's bring in Leela Jacinto, our international affairs editor. Leela, good to see you. First of all, set the stage. What came out of this meeting today?
Well, the meeting happened. The talks
Direct, indirect, a bit of both.
Yes, I mean, really, this is just semantics. So everybody got their way. They were basically indirect, which is what Iran was talking about. But they did, the lead negotiators did meet on their way out in the presence of the Omani foreign minister. This is sort of besides the point. The important things that...
Although it doesn't seem to be to the Iranians, does it? They keep mentioning that it wasn't direct. Even the meeting with Witkoff, they say, that wasn't direct. That was just a separate, by chance, happenstance conversation.
Yes. This is very much for Iranian domestic consumption. That's what it's all about. For all practical purposes, though, this was indirect talks because we had Omani negotiators going back and forth with notes 4 times. This is from Oman itself. They put out a statement. What came out of it so far, what's interesting is that we haven't heard from the US side. We are getting statements from Iran and Oman, and they are in tune. They're singing the same tune. The talks were held in a very constructive atmosphere, and they have agreed to carry on with the talks. Most likely next week on Saturday, they will have a round 2. They lasted for 2.5 hours. It was conducted in a spirit of mutual respect. This is once again something that Tehran finds very important. Of course, especially when dealing with the Trump administration, sometimes respect is not quite maintained. So far, so good. And most importantly, this happened. Let's not forget that just at the start of this week, we had Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the US. This was a visit, the first visit of a foreign leader after the Liberation Day tariffs were announced. And the expectations in Israel, in the Israeli media, was very high. They were expecting a special tariff scrapping of the 17% tariffs that Israel had. They were expecting U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. And this was because there has been a buildup of the U.S. military in the Indian Ocean. We've had at least 6 B-2 stealth bombers. They've been relocated to the island of Diego Garcia. This is a British-controlled island where the U.S. has a base, and there are 2 U.S. aircraft carriers in the Middle East. So there was a lot of expectations of what we have been discussing for a while, that maybe the U.S. would strike Iranian facilities, but there was a complete about-face earlier this week when President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met at the Oval Office, which is where Trump publicly announced that these talks are going to happen.
Take us through, Leela. We were talking earlier, in the last half an hour or so, if you were watching the programme, to various perspectives from the Iranian side and from Washington as well about where things stand. But just take us through a potted history of going back to the JCPOA, back in 2015, this big announcement on a deal, how it started to be unpicked and where it stands now.
Well, it still stands.
Just without the US?
Just without the US. So, the US withdrew in 2018, of course. And this was a deal with Iran, the 5 UN Security Council members, plus Germany. The UN got out of it. And what's been happening with the other partners is Russia and China are basically getting closer and closer in alignment with Iran. When the U.S. got out of the JCPOA, that's what this Iran deal is called, it basically, it did not have all the levers that this deal provides. And the primary lever that this deal had is called the snapback, which is if the signatories find that Iran is not in compliance with its agreements under the deal, any of the members can go to the UN Security Council and ask for a snapback and have the reintroductions of UN sanctions on Iraq. Trump's took the US out of the deal and then went on, adopted a policy of maximum pressure. But actually, if you really go to see the maximum pressure policy was a maximum failure policy because none of the goals were really achieved. Iran regime change didn't happen. The regime is unpopular, but even more entrenched than it was in 2015. The Iranian economy is even more militarized now because under the maximum pressure sanctions, the private sector was simply crushed. The beneficiaries of all the economic deals have been the IRG, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. They are now part of every sector of the economy. They have benefited from the black market. China is doing oil trading with Iran, and the IRG is getting all the money. So the private sector is crushed. And of course, Iran is far more dangerous than it was in 2015. I mean, the numbers are staggering because under the deal, Iran agreed to a uranium enrichment of 3.6%. And right now, the UN watchdog says it has a uranium enrichment of 60%. Their uranium stockpile under the deal, which they agreed to, was around 300 kilograms. And right now, it is more than 8,000 kilograms. So Iran is much more dangerous than it was. So the maximum policy didn't work. And nobody can tell really what the Trump administration is thinking, but it is quite evident that, Trump, the maverick that he is, brought this out very surprisingly. It was not expected.
It's worth putting in perspective because that is there's big figures, aren't they? 3.6% in terms of refinement, 60%. And we're talking about weapons grade at 90%, aren't we? So, and we also have, you touched upon this very interesting as well, which is about this level of economic crisis. You have Israel as well on the sidelines of all of this. You mentioned Netanyahu meeting with Donald Trump. They want a complete dismembering, essentially, of the nuclear capabilities. We saw recently those tit-for-tat strikes. I remember speaking to Iranians on the programme the day after. People were going to the petrol stations. They were worried about fears of, the Gulf War decades ago, stocking up on food in the local stations as well. So there is real fear now in Iran. And just looking at a timeline of this, we're told there's another meeting next Saturday. Mm-hmm. Given what you've said, it sounds like there's a lot of pressure coming from Israel, to which it kind of puts Trump in a situation where he's, we're not talking about this process taking years now. This is going to have to take months for a decision.
Right. And everybody knows that Trump is impatient. Mm-hmm. He's not a very patient man. So some of the messaging from Tehran, too, has been, they're not interested in dragging this along. They are interested in actually getting down to business. So they understand that. There are also, some of the messaging from Tehran seems to show that they kind of understand the Trump 2.0 administration. For one of the big differences actually between the first Trump presidency and the second one is that under the first Trump presidency, they had some pretty senior Iran hawks. John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. These are hardline, pro-Israel Iran nuclear hawks. These people have been sidelined. And Trump seems to be fashioning his own sort of agenda on the Iran nuclear deal. But bear in mind, we are so early in this stage because, these kind of negotiations are very detailed, require real level of expertise. I mean, the Iranian negotiating team, the foreign minister, was a negotiator for the 2015 deal. So actually, if you saw the human personnel of the two teams, the Iran negotiating team actually knows its dossier. The US team was led by a businessman, Trump's special envoy, but there's no way he has the sort of expertise needed to even start the introduction to actual talks to get a deal.
Yeah, he has a surprise element, doesn't he, Steve Witkoff, who said himself he was quixotic. When he first took the job, he said he thought he'd come in like a knight in shining armour, and it hasn't happened on peace in the Middle East and in Ukraine so far. Leela, great to talk to you. Leela Jacinto, our International Affairs editor.